thanks for being here today. As you guys know, we have a weekly Tuesday session with the lovely Ragini Anand. This series is aimed at drawing out the gems of the Vedic wisdom and applying them to our daily lives. So, sometime last week, we asked what the focus of the first two sessions should be based on the 8 segments of the Wheel of Life. And the most popular topic was personal growth. So that's going to be the focus of the first two sessions. So thank you so much, Ragini Anand, for being here with us. We're extremely grateful, and we can't wait to see what's in store for us today. Thanks.
Thank you so much once again. And hello, my lovely friends. I have to first of all apologize that last week I had assumed that most of you were India based and how wrong I was. So my apologies. Wherever you are from around the world, I wish you a wonderful day. And today's topic is our start point, really, in this year-long journey that we spoke of or introduced, should I say, last week. We said that we were going to break the year into 3 segments, if you like, 3 distinct parts. The first part was really, we all start our journeys as being a separated soul or an individual soul. And we find ourselves in this sea of separation. And that's where we're going to begin. And we also said that we were going to look at this sort of separated soul, a segment, in 8 distinct topics, which are going to be 2 weeks long. And thank you for choosing the right segment, a right topic, I should say, to begin with. And you chose personal growth. And so personal growth is going to be what we will be focusing on for the next 2 weeks. So I would like to really say, well, personal growth means different things to different people. First of all, it's a very ambiguous term and very misused and misguided term, in my opinion. Personal growth, as many self-help gurus would call it, tends to be a bit limiting, in my opinion, and doesn't take it far wide enough to really begin to say how the seeking journey should start. The seeking journey from being a separated soul to where we want to go to at the end of our year, to this feeling of oneness or Advaita. It's really very important to understand the ambiguity that is inbuilt or misused or misguided by some when we refer to the topic of personal growth. Now, the seeking journey starts, as I said, with personal growth. And I'm so glad that you've chosen that as a topic, because it's going to allow me to really position these talks in a proper way. Personal growth, if you look at it sort of very simply, then it must mean, in most people's heads, some idea of raising the frequency of our individual soul, some way of going higher, raising ourselves rather than lowering ourselves. There is this idea of an upward movement, I would say, personal growth. Growth of what? It's growth not just of the spiritual version of us, but also all the other aspects of us, whether it's the physical aspect, whether it's physiological, psychological, and spiritual. All those things are embedded in this idea or in this concept of personal growth. So there is some tendency to think of it in terms of raising ourselves, going higher. But if I was to ask most of you, what does it mean to you? What does it mean raising yourself? It's a good question to ask. Where are we going with this personal growth phenomena? We kind of jump on the bandwagon, but what does it actually mean? Well, the synonyms that the Vedic culture came up with, which are sort of ubiquitous, okay? The words which are synonymous are love, truth, and bliss. Satchidananda is what we're all seeking. We're all seeking truth. We're all seeking love. We're all seeking endless bliss or endless, unchangeable, unoscillating idea of happiness. Now, these are all synonyms: love, truth, bliss. And I would add to that it's also synonymous with the word God. So we are really seeking, with our personal growth idea, this idea of always being glowing in love, always being embedded in truth, always being embedded in bliss, always being accessible to God consciousness. Now, these terms in the Vedic culture do not have opposites. So I know linguistically we can say hate is the opposite of love, or lies is the opposite of truth, but in the Vedic culture, the terminology Satchitananda, love, truth, and bliss, does not have any opposites. I.e., God cannot have an opposite, because then it wouldn't be absolute. So therefore, what we are seeking is this absolute concept of love, absolute concept of truth, absolute conscious of bliss, which has no other. So I hope that's sort of clear as to where our journey is going towards when we talk about personal growth. At least that's what I am looking at when we talk about personal growth. Now, I also say that I'm going to use Vedic gems to explore these concepts of a separated soul. Separated soul is about me and mine versus them. Yes, we very much feel that we are individual, we're separate from everything else, that we have a border, a boundary around us, which definitely delineates us from everything else around in the world. And somehow our journey to oneness is going to be about growing in such a way that these boundaries begin to dissolve slowly, and that we begin to see permeated holes within our boundaries, whereby we can experience this love and truth of all things being one. And that's a really wonderful journey to embark upon. And I look forward to all of us growing personally from these sessions as we go along. Me from trying to bring the ideas to you, and you listening to it with keen listening to take these ideas on board. So I'm going to draw upon Mahabharata as a great place to see how one begins to emulate personal growth. Now, Mahabharata, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is one of the sort of the ultimate Vedic tale. And one could say it's the history of humanity, really. And on one side, we have the baddies, or people who are self-destructive and going downwards, downwards track from personal growth that we are seeking. We are going on an upward trajectory. The baddies were on a bad, downward trajectory. So it always helps to know what we're trying to emulate by looking at a story. So Mahabharata is on one side. Let's say if you can, in your mind, mentally divide a page. On the right-hand side, we're going to put the baddies who are on a downward trajectory. And on the left-hand side, we're going to put the goodies, the people called Pandavas, on the left-hand side, who are on the upward personal growth trajectory. So if you can mentally picture that, then I'm going to try and outline this story to explain how we can start to emulate our own versions of personal growth. Now, in the middle of that mental boundary you've created, on the left-hand side is the goodies, and on the right-hand side are the bad guys. In the middle, if you like, we're going to draw the 7 chakras of human physiology. Most of you will understand that we have chakras embedded in our body, starting with the Muladhara right at the bottom, the root chakra leading up to the Sahasrara in the crown chakra. So if you look at the Muladhara, the basal 3 chakras, the Muladhara, the Swadhisthana, and the Manipurna chakra, those are the lowest level of chakras. So if you put those in the middle of the page that you've created in your mental space, we will now begin to discuss the 2 sides, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Really, in life, we only find 2 models of operation. Those individuals who are seeking an upward trajectory, and those individuals in life who are ruled and guided by the downward trajectory. Now, Vedic culture is not here to tell you what's right or wrong. Vedic culture doesn't so much worry about duality. Duality is going to exist because we live in a binary world. It's not so concerned, but in order to explain personal growth, I think all of you will accept that we're on an upward trajectory. So let's just discuss the 2 models of operation that exist. And whichever world you look at, whether it's the political world, the social world, the individual world, the family world, you will find that there are 2 approaches. On the left-hand side, the upward trajectory mode is what I call consciousness-led. So it's led by consciousness. And we call this model of operation guru-disciple model of operation. And on the right-hand side, we have the ego-led world, where we call that world the master-slave model of operation. So if you like, the Pandavas were on the left-hand side, and the Kauravas of the Mahabharata were on the right-hand side. Now, if you look at how did truth become, the winning formula for Pandavas? Well, if you look at if you look at that model of master slave and the guru disciple model, there are 5 segments. The leader in the master slave model is very much an adharmic person, a person who is blind. In this case, it was the blind king whose love for his son was so ridiculous that even though he wasn't worthy of the throne, he put him on the throne to rule a huge territory. So the leaders in this master-slave model tend to be blind, or tend to be slightly ignorant of the whole, and tend to be slightly ignorant of the role that they're playing. Now, if you look at the So that's one segment of operation in the whole operating field. The next section would be security. So in every existence, we're going to have to bring in security. If it's political, then we're talking about, security in terms of weapons and, armies and what have you. If you're thinking of physiology, then security is all to do with, your body's ability to build immunity or whatever. So there is this concept of security in every model that we look at. Now, in the master-slave model, the ego-led model of security, it becomes a hard power. It's done by weapons, and it's done with a lot of force. So in Mahabharata, Dronacharya was the head of security. He's really, he has the ability to have lots of power and weapons and so on. Now, in a conscious-led model, let's look at the other side, which are looking at personal growth as the model for existence. Yudhishthir is the leader of the good guys, in this case, the guru-disciple model of consciousness-led model. He is seen as a dharmic. What does dharmic mean? He's a dharmic leader in that he looks for win-win type of scenarios. He wants not only himself to win, but he also wants others to win. That's a consciousness-led model of existing. And in his kingdom, the security is soft power. It looks at bringing everybody on board, not using weapons, using, modeling, self-modeling and role modeling as the power for ascendance. Security, if it's used as hard power, becomes a downward trajectory in personal growth, I would say. Now, let's look at the next segment. In the master-slave model, you would have education as one of the segments needed or necessary for existence. For existing, you must educate either yourself, your community, or your country. In a master-slave model, usually what happens with education is that it is force-fed. It doesn't look at the desires of the individual or the talents of the individual often. What happens is that it only wants to use education in a way that, it meets their agenda. Now, in the consciousness-led model, education is seen as, spreading wisdom, spreading talent, looking at people's talent and desires. And in the Pandava's world, Nakul, the youngest brother, not the youngest, the second youngest brother, was put in charge of education. Arjuna was in charge of security. Yudhishthir was in charge of leadership. On the master-slave model, you had Dhritarashtra as leader, Dronacharya's security, and you had Kripacharya's education. But everything was blurred because the leader was blind. Everything else became a bit blind, and it was not seen as a personal growth model of operation. It was seen as a personal decline model of operation. Now we move on to culture. Culture is another segment that is essential in any, ecosystem. What do we mean by culture? Well, in one culture, in the master-slave model, the culture is to disrespect family and elders and to go against those values. Okay, culture is very much seen as what do we believe in, what do we hold dear. Arts and culture is a very important segment. Dusashan, who is the one of the two sons of the blind king, is being put in charge of culture, in my opinion. He disrespects his family. He's even able to derobe his sister, one of his sister-in-laws, in front of the entire court. This is not a personal growth model. Okay. On the opposite side of the Guru disciple consciousness-led model, Sahadev, the youngest brother, who loves and respects his family and his elders, is put in charge of culture and art. So very different modes of operation. Then the final segment in any ecosystem is internal affairs. Okay, by this we mean how do you hold your budgets and how do you do all your internal planning and so on. Now, in the master-slave model, Duryodhan is charged with the internal affairs. So he's been made the chancellor, and he is the holder of the treasury, and he uses his money to extract taxation and to disempower his subjects. The personal growth model of operation on the other side, on the Pandava side, Bhim is in charge of the treasury, of the money, and it's based on contributing not only by the subjects but also the rulers. So one is a extracting based, me and mine type of a model, and others is us and ours type of a model. So you can see very clearly when you look at these two very distinctively different modes of operation and modes of ecosystems of existence, that one is geared towards personal growth, which leads to community growth, which leads to consciousness growth, which is an upward cycle. Whereas the other master-slave model is to disempower, and it's to go downwards in the chakras through, self-gratification type of operations, like greed and fear and lust and, rock and roll lifestyle. And the other is a self-sacrifice or sense-sacrifice model that allows the Kundalini to rise and go upwards to the Sahasrara in the Vedic tradition. Now, in the story of Mahabharata, even though Pandavas were the just, if you like, rulers for the throne, and they should have been given the throne, Yudhishthira should have been the king of the throne. He's actually been the blind king. The Dhritarashtra basically gives him a small kingdom called Khandava Prasth. Okay, so basically looks at dividing what was already a wonderful empire, and in order to kind of just keep him quiet, Duryodhan and his father give Yudhishthira just a small patch of arid, completely useless piece of land called Khandavaprastha, which is really like hell on earth. There's nothing grows there. It's just all rocky terrain, desert-like, arid, etc. And Yudhishthira, being consciousness-led, righteousness-based kind of a character, he turns that hell into a heaven, what then becomes known as Indraprasth. Indra is the god of all gods, the king of Sahasrara chakra. Okay, that's what that really means. It means that he is the creator of heaven on earth. Now, Yudhishthira of Pandavas take this piece of land and make heaven out of it. And they do that with their model of consciousness-led personal growth type of a model where everybody wins. Now, if you look at the the main kind of points of these two modes of operation, or the two modes of the two ecosystems, the guru-disciple model is all about win-win. As I said, everybody should win. It's a God-centric model. It's centered around God. In this story, it's Krishna, one of the Vishnu avatars, who becomes the, if you like, the guru of consciousness that leads an upward trajectory. Okay. This culture is also based on agriculture. Okay, they believe in working with nature. Yudhishthir was also very much into herbal medicine and being transparent, and he was non-violent, and he worked with not only what I call horizontal logic or binary logic, he also worked with cosmic logic going upwards. So vertical logic and the horizontal logic. He applied both those logics and worked with them to have personal growth. Not only for himself, whereby he fought all the demons, external and internal, and becomes a hero. But, you know, he became known for taking the world to war, not for gaining territory, but for going to war for the truth. For what kind of truth? The truth that we began with, truth, love, and bliss, the Satchitananda. That's how he was growing himself upwards, using that philosophy. And you look at the failed model of the master-slave model of the ego-led blind king. His concept was few will win over many. So it was me and mine, my family wins, my nearest win, the others can go to hell. And he was not God-centered, he was self-centered. And he was very anti-agricultural, I would say. He didn't care about, you know, how the world will, you know, the ecosystem of the earth plane will flourish or not. Mother Earth didn't matter to him. And if I was to have him, you know, take a stab, he would probably be drugs-based rather than herbal-based. And he wasn't transparent. He was a conspirer. So everybody in his gang, including his brother-in-law, who was the biggest conspiracist, they didn't live, they gambled. Okay, so they were always gambling and conspiring and spinning and violent. And they were based in this binary logic. One side is good, therefore the other side must be bad, you know, dividing rather than uniting field. And they were all karma based. So I think Mahabharata gives you a very good kind of a platform from which you can emulate what you may want to do as a human being, whether you're individual, your family, a community, a country, or even cosmically, a planet, if you are focused on personal growth upwards. Okay, if you define personal growth as becoming more and more conscious, more and more united, more and more bliss orientated, more and more non-violent, then you would definitely take the stance of Yudhishthir. You will not take the stance of Dhritarashtra, the blind king. So I found this as an amazing click that only happened to me yesterday, actually. I came up with this kind of idea of how can I speak to you today using a story from the Vedic classic and bring you this concept of personal growth, which is so many things to so many people. Now, if you're very serious about personal growth, and you're very serious about going from this separated soul to a oneness soul, where you feel united with God consciousness, then there is no options really left to you other than to emulate this self-sacrifice model, what we call the Tyagi model of living, whereby you have to give something up of yourself. And that giving up is usually the ego self, which loves the senses and the sense gratification, the greed, the lust, the fear-based realities. If you don't give that up, you cannot call it personal growth. And this is where I tend to disagree with a lot of self-help books, which says, well, you just, think and you can manifest your growth. I don't totally buy it, because I haven't seen success come out of it. I think one has to give up, as the Mahabharata story shows, because after the war, Yudhishthir is challenged with uniting all the nations which are disparate in his empire. And he manages to, by convincing and by soft power, uniting, I think it was 54 nations in the Vedic tradition, through his use of personal growth and having fought all his demons and being on the side of the righteousness and being on the side of win-win. To me, that is personal growth. Now, having said all of this, I did talk about the 5 segments, the leadership, security, education, culture, and internal affairs. Whether you are emulating a country or whether you're emulating your own life, you are the leader of your own life. So are you going to be blind or are you going to be awakened? That's your choice. In terms of security, when you are dealing with something you feel fearful of, are you always going to use hard power, like, threatening? Or are you going to use soft power, ability to convince people with words and actions? In terms of education, are you going to allow your soul to blossom with wisdom? Are you going to allow your desires to really manifest properly? Are you going to really exercise your talent or not? Because, the society says that, you must get a degree, whatever the degree, as long as it gets your job, you're going to get it. You're not going to go towards personal growth with that kind of an education model, which doesn't allow you to flower and allow you to be who you really are and what your true purpose is. As an individual, what is your culture? Is it to disrespect your elders? Is it to disrespect your family? Or is it to lovingly unite them in your family, to unite them and to tolerate their differences and bring them along and bring the youth along so that they're not, how can I say it? As growing up in the culture that I was brought up in, what I call the progressive culture, I was very much made to feel very embarrassed of my culture. And for the first 30, 40 years of my life, I felt very, what can I say? I didn't want to belong to the Indian culture because the media and society made it look so sort of, downward, backward, all of these things. So culture is a very important thing. We must be proud of a tradition that we stem from, or not necessarily stem from, but the tradition that gives us the upward trajectory towards personal growth is the culture that we should all be adhering to. We are all of one planet. It's nothing to do with religion, countries, or any of these divisions. It's to do with these two different modes of operation. Are you going to be ego-led, or are you going to be consciousness-led? And that will define your culture of respect, culture of being proud of what you believe or what you see as the goal in life. And then the final thing, internal affairs. Are you going to be, taking money, not sharing it, not contributing, not passing it on? These are all tendencies that we need to look at when we look at personal growth. So I hope that kind of helps you see how the Vedic culture could be applied towards this idea of personal growth in the separated soul model. Where does one begin to make that journey? I think these two distinct parts of the Mahabharata story offers a great opportunity to meditate upon where you're heading and how you're going to, excel towards an expansion rather than shrinking and destruction. So for me, it has been a marvelous kind of an insight, in terms of what is important when it comes to personal. It's given me clarity, put it that way. And I've read so many personal growth books, and I've been so confused. And I'm not saying that everything gives you one pixel, 2 pixels here and there. But Mahabharata, I found that it was the entire thing in one epic, which concludes everything in a beautiful way. And next session, what I would like to be able to do with you is to also talk a little bit about the role of karma, in personal growth. Because it's not just as easy as saying, well, it's all about an upward trajectory, but you have to also look at some approaches in the Vedic culture that helps you remove your karma. Karma is just nothing but becoming aware of where you are stuck in life, what's holding you back, what might you have done in the past that's holding you back from the upward trajectory, and how can you clear it? So next week, I would like to talk a bit about that. But I also want to start introducing this sort of seeking. Where's this seeking going to lead you? If you're going upwards, what can you expect to happen in different areas of your life? And how can you make it sort of almost tangible and quantifiable? So in this year-long journey, I want you to have some mechanism in place whereby you can measure your upward trajectory in small baby steps. It'll become like a control panel for us. And we'll be able to see over the year's journey that we are actually ascending towards an expansion of our consciousness and our baby steps towards this Satchidananda, truth, love, and bliss, something that can never be contested, never be taken away, can never have the opposite. And that's where we're heading. So I'd like to discuss karma. I would like to discuss this kind of a control panel of seeking, how can we calibrate ourselves and our journey. And I'd like to also bring in the role of deities of the Vedic tradition to help us move away from the individual soul towards a more sort of permeated bhakti soul, where we begin to start getting glimpses of things outside our physical boundary, mental boundary, and how can we make holes in our boundary, in our, in this very fixed view that we have of ourselves, so that we can start to kind of break out into the whole, into what I'm going to call the second segment, the bhakti soul. And the idea of deities will help us in more ways than one. So next session on personal growth will be in those three main areas: the deity consciousness, karma removal, and where this seeking journey will go, and the control panel, if you like, that we can calibrate our journey upwards with. So with that, I'm going to conclude my session today and open up to any questions you may have. So far, I have said a lot, and I've please forgive me for those who don't know the Mahabharata story, but I think that we will have other opportunities to look at that story, so certain aspects of it, and a little at a time, you will build an idea of what Mahabharata unfolds as the greatest epic poem ever written. So over to you. Please ask any questions you may have.
Thank you. That was absolutely lovely. We do have a few questions. So the first one is from Night Changer. Night Changer is asking, is the spiritual and the physical in terms of self separate things? If so, what's the difference?
The spiritual and the physical
Two
is
separate things.
separate things. Okay, actually, there is no separation. In the Vedic philosophy, the consciousness and physical are one and the same, okay, as I understand it. Our ability to not see it as the same is our ego self, basically. So when the ego self starts to drop, then we see everything is just built of consciousness. There is no physical, really. And when we get into the oneness modules through the Advaita principles and the stories of the Upanishads, that will become an experience in you, hopefully, as we move along.
Thank you. So Daniel has some questions. I think you touched upon when you might be addressing some of these, but yeah. So apologize if I'm a little bit out of context, but I would really appreciate if you could touch upon some of these topics. Visiting temples, activating Kundalini, about worshipping deities like worshipping Durga to get us rid of negativity. Lastly, the poverty consciousness. I would really appreciate it. I've been waiting to ask these questions since last week.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. We will be touching on that because the 8 segments we've defined in this first third of the year, money is one, I believe, and deities will come in at every segment. So next week I will touch on the deities that you may want to go to in order to achieve personal growth. Okay, and also the deities, the temples that you can begin to kind of start to collect, if you like, in your repertoire of understanding. I'll give you some, kind of idea of which temples you can look at, either digitally or if you're able to visit. Like if you are in India, you can maybe physically visit. But yes, I can begin to do that starting next session. So I am all into deity worship. I'm all into temple-based openings. You know, as I said last week, these are incredible tools in the toolkit to grow your consciousness. So we will begin to do that very quickly next week.
Thank you. So Red October asks, how does one defeat his ego and pride in such a way that the person feels welcome to who he wants to become, rather than struggling to leave behind who he is, especially when as human, we have temporal needs which utilize the senses?
Oh, that's a big question. Um, and I think that that applies to every one of us, right? How do you do it? And I don't think I have a single answer other than it's a one step at a time type of a journey. And I don't think one ever loses their ego completely. Anyhow, but what you can do, what I've noticed in my journey, is that I've started to notice what an egoless entity looks like and how they live, how they respond. And you know, I have few examples of that in my in both in stories from the Vedic culture and in real life. And it becomes a curiosity for me to kind of look at them and say, well, what is the difference that makes the difference in them? You know, how are they doing it? How are they becoming egoless without causing, as you said, you know, pain to yourself or to others in the process? I think that's what you asked, but I think it's going to be a journey of emulating, you know, looking for role models that you can emulate a step at a time, because you can't do it all at once. It's a step at a time. And it's a giving up a bit of you, whether it's anger or greed or fear or lust. You know, how do you take that energy of when you're feeling, you know, greed? How do you take it and ascend it and sacrifice it in a way, one step at a time, that so that it doesn't create too much pain in you or in others as you're doing it? So I hope that answers your question.
So Param Shivahom asks, in Mahabharata, four Pandavas, including Arjun and Draupadi, died while climbing the Mandara mountain in the end. Only Yudhishthir reached heaven. Whereas Arjun received Sri Bhagavad Gita from Bhagwan Krishna directly, but he still didn't reach heaven. Request you, our Bhagwan Krishna, to guide us Arjuns. What shall we do to end up better than the Arjun of the Mahabharata? Love and peace to you.
Oh my God, you're streaks ahead of me. I think, Paramashiva, you need to do the next session, I think, because you're already on the 7 steps and I haven't even got there yet. So Arjuna, because at the end, I believe we all decide whether we want to become bodies of light or whether we want to come back and teach and take another body. The choice is always ours. God, or God consciousness, always adheres to our will persistence and our will, our individual will. So if I was to ask, I don't know how many people here there are here, but if I was to ask them, you know, how at the end of your life, what would you like to do? Take another birth or ascend and never, what do you want? Each individual is going to say a different thing. And based on that, we're going to be dealt out our next cards. So some of us want to turn our bodies into light, not have the pain and suffering of coming back into another birth. And some of us want to come back to birth and teach whilst being enlightened. Some of us want to still have enjoyment of life and the body consciousness. And so depending on that, I believe that I think that is the message of, the Pandavas going up the 7 steps, but I haven't got there yet. So I'll have to think about that, Paramashivo.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, and then we can sort of end this. So Red October asks again, if we are to aspire what we expect to become in our upward journey, doesn't that mean having attachments to that goal? Weren't we taught about detachment?
Again, I think that is a kind of a misunderstanding of the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and what is deemed to be an attachment to the goal and what is seen as a trajectory of personal growth. It's a good question. And yes, it's like, there is no selfless service. Yeah, it's that kind of a question. But if you are adhering to personal growth, you're not really, when you are on this journey, you're not so much focused on the fruits of your journey, in that I must get there, I must get there, I must get there. You are just doing your dharmic, truthful deed, and then leaving the rest of whether you will get to the final stages of nirvana, or whether you get to the the 5th plane or the 6th plane. That's not up to you. You have to, your goal is just to be on that, decide which path you're taking, a personal growth path or a personal descent path. That's your willpower. But you can't, then how that leads you upwards is not something you should be attached to. Where you end up is not something you should be attached to. You will go at the pace that, cosmic logic sees, deems you to be worthy of. The worthy of question is not something we can answer. Only the all-seeing eye can answer that. So that's what I believe attachment means.
Thank you. This actually reminds me of the concept of surrendering, where it's about putting in sort of the work and working towards the goal, but not worrying about the outcome of that goal.
Exactly. It's choosing which way you're going, upwards or downwards, and then being happy with that and all the consequences that come from it. But we don't know what the consequences will be, fully. We just know that we're on a trajectory.
Definitely. Thank you. And last question is, can these things that you have spoken about since now, can it be related to the meditation I am? And how can this help us from being a person to being a presence? So I think Lulian here is trying to, I think the I am that he's referring to is the self-inquiry technique by, I think, Ramana Maharishi and Muji, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this kind of a technique will certainly get you to the concept of what oneness might be like, but it won't create a better version of you on the earth plane, in my opinion, in immediate sense. So when we look at Yudhishthir's journey, he's had to go through a lot, hasn't he? I mean, he's had to take vanvas, which means, he had to live in the forest for 13 years. He had to do all sorts of things, give up his territory, fight demons, both internally and externally. Now, meditation I find, is not the first step. As I said last week, we are still at this sort of individuated, separated soul who's got to fight all the demons and become worthy of oneness. And meditation might not be the first tool. I'm not saying that you don't do meditation. Of course, having meditative mind is going to help you to achieve it faster, but you've still got to fight through these demons, internal and external, which I call karma, and all of that. So what I would say is do both. Okay, don't be just hoping that you meditate and all your life will just suddenly fall into place. It hasn't worked like that with me or people I've known to meditate. So meditation simply, quietens the mind so you can get into that space to bring back solutions to fight the demons more easily and more successfully. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's about it today. Thank you guys for attending, and thank you so much, Ragini Anand, for your time and for doing these weekly sessions with us. They're absolutely wonderful and really, really helpful. So thank you, everyone, and thank you once again, Ragini. Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely day wherever you are.